The year is 1887. Somewhere along the modern-day border between Turkey and Iraq, a young man and his traveling companion are en route to Kurdistan in search of an ancient mystical brotherhood, when suddenly his traveling companion is bitten by a snake. This forces them to spend a month at the home of a priest in a nearby small town. While waiting for his friend to heal, the young man strikes up a good many conversations with the priest. During one of them, the priest mentions an old parchment that had been in his family for generations, and that recently, a Russian prince had arrived and offered him an enormous amount of money for it. Growing suspicious, he refuses, allowing the prince to only make a copy of its contents. Intrigued, the young man asks if he can see the parchment. When the priest shows it to him, he can hardly believe his eyes. Later, when the priest is called away on business for the night, the young man sneaks into the priest's room so that he can make a copy of it for himself. In his own words, he says, "From the moment I had this treasure, so full of mystery and promise, securely and unnoticeably sewn in the lining of my clothes, it was as if all other interests and intentions evaporated." The young man was Georges Ivanovich Gurdjieff. The parchment, a map of pre-sand Egypt. Today on Totally Awesome History, a mystic and his map. In the first half of the 20th century, Georges Gurdjieff came to be known as something of a spiritual and philosophical guru. He developed a system for enlightenment, or waking up as he would have said it, that was allegedly based on ancient knowledge he claimed to have learned during his many travels in Central Asia, Eastern Africa, Tibet, and Siberia. He called it the Fourth Way. One of its primary methods of transmission was through sacred movements and dances that Gurdjieff choreographed. They were designed to overcome our mental, emotional, and physical condition, and thereby lead to a deeper understanding of life, the universe, and everything. After a near-fatal car accident in 1924, he switched from choreography to writing. In his second book, Meetings with Remarkable Men, he gives us an autobiographical account of his youth and his 18-year-long search for ancient esoteric knowledge. It's also in this book that he tells us the story of the map of pre-sand Egypt. After he made a copy of the map, the next thing he did was travel to Egypt, where he became a tour guide for an archaeologist named Professor Skridlov. At Giza, the site of the pyramids and the Sphinx, they ran into none other than the Russian prince Lubavitsky, the very man who had visited the priest earlier and made his own copy of the map. Interestingly, Skridlov and Lubavitsky knew each other, and both would become companions to Gurdjieff in his quest for truth. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. While he was at Giza, Gurdjieff tells us in his own words, "I was spending all my free time walking among these places like one possessed, hoping to find, with the help of my map of pre-sand Egypt, an explanation of the Sphinx and of certain other monuments of antiquity." Obviously, there was something very special about the Sphinx. But in one of the greatest feats of audience frustration of all time, with the possible exception of the series finale of Lost, he never tells us what it is. In fact, after this episode, he doesn't mention the map again at all, leaving us to solve the riddle for ourselves. Now, the traditional way to date the Sphinx is to ask your father first. Egyptologists date the Sphinx to roughly 2500 BC. However, some modern geologists now contend that due to evidence of water erosion from rainfall in the Sphinx, it is hundreds to thousands of years older, with estimates ranging from 9000 BC to 3100 BC. And certain other mysteries remain. Some have suggested that the head of the Sphinx is not the original. And what about the rooms and tunnels rumored to be underneath the Sphinx? Now, the typical response from many dry, mainstream Egyptologists is to say that there is simply no hard evidence of Egyptian civilization predating 3000 BC. But new evidence suggests otherwise. Between approximately 9000 and 3300 BC, the Sahara experienced several cycles of alternating wet and dry climates. If the Sphinx was constructed before the sands came, it would have had to have been during this period. In the southwestern desert of Egypt, a site called Nabta Playa once sat on the edge of a lake during the wet periods and was inhabited. During the last of the wet periods, from approximately 4600 to 3300 BC, the pre-sand Egyptian people at Nabta Playa constructed giant stone structures, or megaliths, that were unprecedented in Africa at the time. Not only that, but these megaliths display the roots of ancient Egyptian religion as we know it. The only other place we see these patterns repeated outside of the Sahara is further south and dated much later. What's interesting about this in relation to Gurdjieff is that after visiting the Sphinx, he traveled south in search of something. First, with Prince Lubavitski to ancient Thebes. Then, even further south, to Abyssinia in the Sudan with Professor Skridlov. What was on that map? Even earlier than this, in Turkey, at a site called Gobekli Tepe, we now have evidence of megalithic construction dating from 10,000 to 8200 BC. Traditional scholarship says that at this time, the human race lived in small nomadic bands, with no writing, no metal, no pottery, none of the things we associate with civilization. At Gobekli Tepe, 16-ton pillars were arranged in circles and put in place without the knowledge of wheels or animal husbandry. There's also no sign of habitation, agriculture, kitchens, cooking fires, tombs, and no social hierarchy. Food even had to be shipped in. What all of this indicates is that not only is an earlier date and alternative explanation for the construction of the Sphinx possible in Egypt, but that something big was happening in that part of the world at large. If Gurdjieff's map is authentic, then it could totally rewrite everything we know about ancient history. What became of the map is unknown. In meetings with remarkable men, Gurdjieff only mentions that he left many manuscripts in Russia, presumably at the start of the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. Could it still be out there, tucked away in some forgotten corner? Has anyone bothered to look? Does National Geographic know that I'm available? What other secrets would it reveal if it were found? Even the possibility of it causes us to question everything we think we know, and to investigate the implications with all the might of our curiosity and imagination. But above all, it gives us license to wonder. And for that reason, Gurdjieff and his map of pre-sand Egypt are totally awesome history.